Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, and this article is entitled Penrose, Charles William. So this one is about Charles W. Penrose. So Charles W. Penrose, in case you didn't know, was in the Quorum of the 12 and was also in the First Presidency, which is why we're talking about him today and not another day. However, I don't expect this article to know that much about him because he wasn't called to the Quorum of the 12 until 1904, and this was published in 1901. So also he wasn't called into the First Presidency until 1911. To be honest, I'm not sure why he wasn't part of some of the other series that we've looked at. Somehow he got kind of skipped over, like missed. I'm not sure how that happened, but evidently he wasn't part of the other articles. So that's hence why we're talking about him today. It's because we have mentioned the apostles that were active in 1900, but since this was shortly after that, I think he was just missed by the Lives of Our Leaders series. But I'm not sure why he wasn't in the Greatness in Men series, since I think that was during the time when he was in the First Presidency, but it might have been just after. Anyway, he just got missed by the series that we've looked at so far, and hence why we're talking about him today. This is our last article for the moment in the Biographical Encyclopedia. The reason for that is that I am going through the First Presidency, all of the members of the First Presidency that have ever been in the First Presidency, until the semi-modern day. But this is the last one that appears in the Biographical Encyclopedia. So after that, I'm going to have to find other sources. I don't have a problem finding other sources. I have some other sources. So, not to worry. We will find some more. And I am going to go up to the semi-modern day, as I said. I don't want to mention anyone who is currently living, who is in the First Presidency. So I'm only going to stick with historical sources. So nothing after 1970. Only to fact check myself on Wikipedia. So that is my plan. So I just wanted to let you know that that's what's going to happen in the future. We still have several more people to get through before we've gotten through all of the First Presidency. This is just the last one that appears in the Biographical Encyclopedia. Anyways, so what do I know about Charles W. Penrose? First Presidency, Quorum of the 12. What else do I know about it? He was a poet? Was he not? I believe he was. Then wrote a couple of poems that became hymns, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to look that up to be 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that that's true. Anyways, past that, I don't think I know a whole lot about his life. And my lack of knowledge about his life, for me, means that I would really like to know more, and that is why we are reading about him today. So, let's just dive right into the article. Penrose, Charles William, Assistant Church Historian from 1896 to 1899. So that was his big claim to fame at the time, yeah? Was born February 4th, 1832 at Camberwell, London, England. Oh, he was from England, okay. Being naturally of a studious and inquiring turn of mind, with quick perception and remarkable memory, he speedily mastered at school the common rudiments of education. He read the scriptures when only 4 years old. Jeez. Gosh, like my 8-year-old can't read scriptures. Okay. And was well versed in the doctrines of the Bible, the wonderful sayings and predictions of the Savior and the ancient prophets and apostles. This paved the way for his acquaintance with and his subsequent acceptance of Mormonism, which, from its spiritual character, is reasonable and substantial doctrines, feasible theories, and sound practical results, attracted his attention while a mere lad, and in due time, after he had thoroughly investigated and compared its teachings with the Bible, numbered him among its converts. He joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in London, May 14th, 1850. Hang on, how old was he? 1832. Okay, so he was 18, yeah? Okay, so he was definitely 18. And is the only member of his father's family who has ever embraced the faith. His scriptural attainments and spiritual inclinations soon brought him under notice of the presiding authorities of the London Conference, and in January 1851, when not yet 19 years old, he was ordained an elder, and 2 months later was sent on a mission to Malden in Essex to preach the gospel, break new ground, and build up branches of the church. This movement was much in opposition to the wishes of his friends, and to his own pecuniary interests, as he had been offered, on condition of his remaining home, a life situation in a government office. Well, he clearly turned that down. Shutting his eyes to the gilded bait of temptation, he took up the cross of the Master, and literally, without purse or scrip, taking not a penny in his pocket, nor even a change of dress, started out afoot upon his mission as a servant of the Lord. Okay, there's preaching without purse and scrip, and showing a lot of faith, and then there's just being silly. Like, come on, you can take some more clothes with you. That's ridiculous. With bleeding feet but undaunted heart, he reached the town of Malden, having slept out of doors for the first time in his life the chilly night previous. Okay. He was an utter stranger in the place, and the first Mormon elder to visit that region of the country. He met with much opposition, but steadily worked his way in the town of Malden and the country round about, and succeeded in raising up branches of the church in Malden, Danbury, Chelmsford, Colchester, and other places, baptizing a great number of persons of both sexes, many of whom are now in Utah, and being instrumental by the laying on of hands in the restoration to health of many persons afflicted with disease. He possessed the gift of healing to a remarkable degree, and several of the cures performed were of a miraculous order. Wow. That's crazy. So he was clearly a very hard worker. Alright, there's a picture. This is a terrible picture, so I'll only briefly show it. Charles W. Penrose, people. Okay, he had a beard, I think a mustache in this picture, but you can barely tell. Ugh. He labored for 7 years in poor agricultural districts, opening new missionary fields, building up branches, and suffering many hardships and trudging on foot between 3,000 and 4,000 miles every year. It was during this period, on January 21st, 1855, that he married Miss Lucetta Stratford of Malden, sister of the late Bishop Edward Stratford of Ogden, who, with all the family he had, was brought into the church. Elder Penrose was next called to preside over the London Conference, and subsequently over the Cheltenham Pastorate, consisting of the Cheltenham, Worcestershire, Monmouthshire, and Herefordshire conferences, and later over the Birmingham Pastorate, consisting of the Birmingham, Warwick, Staffordshire, and Shropshire conferences. I apologize for my terrible British pronunciation. Okay. His pen, ever brilliant and keen at this time, was almost as busy as his ready tongue. He wrote many theological articles for the Millennial Star, the principal church organ of the European Mission, and out of the silken and golden threads of his poetical thoughts and emotions, wove the fabric of those beautiful songs of Zion which have cheered the hearts and fired with patriotism and holy zeal the drooping souls of thousands. I told you he wrote hymns. In the year 1861, after over 10 years of gratuitous and successful service in the ministry, he was released from his labors and emigrated to America. He crossed the sea in the sailing ship Underwriter, assisting with the charge of 620 passengers, and living with them in the steerage during the 30 days from Liverpool to New York. Okay, so he kind of got a job on board, you know? He also helped to care for them during the journey through the States and up the Missouri River. He crossed the plains driving his own ox team with his family and his wife's relatives, and was 11 weeks on the toilsome way. Arriving in Utah, he settled in Farmington, Davis County, and for the first time in his life went to work in the fields, climbing the mountains for firewood and laboring at the hardest kind of physical work for which he was naturally unfit, and teaching school in the winter. That probably was something he wanted to do more. I can totally relate to that. I am not built for physical work. It is not my thing. Yeah, that's why I work on computers. He made headway, however, and acquired a small home. During his 3 years' residence there, he was ordained one of the presidents of the 56th Quorum of 70. In the fall of 1864, at the solicitation of Apostle Ezra T. Benson, he removed to Cache Valley and again labored for a home, teaching school in the winter. Okay. He had scarcely more than secured some land, a log cabin and lot, when he was called, in April 1865, oh gosh, to go to England on a mission, and was notified to be in Salt Lake City by the 1st of May, prepared with means to carry him on his journey. Gosh. Can you imagine? Like, you've only been in that place for, 6 months? And it's like, and now we're calling you on a mission. Like, what? I wasn't done yet. Gosh. Yeah, that's kind of scary, you know? Leaving your family then behind with not a lot. In company with 40 other missionaries in charge of Captain William B. Preston, Elder Penrose set out upon his second journey across the plains, with mule teams, but walking most of the way. They were 36 days in reaching Omaha. The Indians were very hostile at the time, and people were killed before and behind the little band of missionaries. But they got through in safety despite many fears and predictions to the contrary, and reaching New York, sailed for Liverpool. Elder Penrose arrived in England, labored first among colliers in the colliers in Lancashire, with success, and on the 1st of February 1866 was sent to preside over the Essex Conference, which he had built up several years before. Yeah, I didn't forget. That is cool that he got to open the area and then he got to preside over it later. Like, that is cool. On the 6th of June following, he was appointed to preside over the London Conference. He traveled all over the British Isles and visited Paris during the Great Exposition. The last 2 years of his mission, he assisted to edit the Millennial Star under President Franklin D. Richards, also preaching on Sundays in different places, baptizing many in Liverpool, and helping to ship many companies of emigrating saints. At the close of the emigration season of 1868, he was released from his mission and sailed for home, taking rail from New York to Point of Rocks and thence to stage line to Salt Lake City, arriving in Utah after an absence of 3.5 years. He next engaged in mercantile pursuits, which seems to be much more conducive to his personality, yeah? Since he wasn't that fond of heavy labor, yeah? With William H. Shearman of Logan under the firm name of Shearman and Penrose, and did a fine business until the cooperative movement was instituted, when the whole stock was turned over to the new institution. Okay. May 1st, 1869, Elder Penrose became secretary and treasurer of the Logan Cooperative Institution, that makes sense, and bookkeeper for their store. He acted as a home missionary, traveling and preaching on Sundays, often in company with Apostle Benson, who was a member of the High Council, and took an active part in all church movements in the county. In January 1870, he resigned his position in the cooperative institution, bade adieu to Logan, and took up his residence in Ogden, having been invited by Apostle Franklin D. Richards to take editorial charge under his supervision of the Ogden Junction, which had just been started as a semi-weekly. Okay, so he was offered a job in the newspaper, yeah? That sounds pretty cool, because he clearly took it. This was an occupation for which he was peculiarly well fitted, not only by nature, which undoubtedly designed him for a journalist, but by education and experience, and the paper which he did so much to build up and render popular, and which lived and prospered as long as he was connected with it, will be long remembered for the interest and pointed vigor, the snap and ginger of his pungent writings. He was assistant editor 1 year, and was then made editor-in-chief, and afterwards business manager as well. Cool. He started the Daily Junction in September 1872, and much of the time was its editor, local business manager, and traveling agent, and, to use his own terse expression, was worked half to death. It sounds like it. Like, when you're starting something up and you have to have a whole bunch of hats on, there's a lot to do. You have, 3 full-time jobs, basically. Having previously become naturalized, he was elected February 13, 1871, a member of the Ogden City Council. He took active part in all the affairs and improvements of the municipality as long as he remained in Ogden, and he was re-elected to the council every term. His name was found on both tickets whenever there were 2 parties in the field. He served in all 4 terms, and before the expiration of the last one, had removed to Salt Lake City. At the organization of the Weber Stake of Zion, he was ordained a high priest and made a member of the High Council, and remained so for a long time after his removal from Ogden. He also acted as a home missionary, both in stake and territorial capacity, his political record in the municipality having won him influence and the confidence of his associates and the people generally. He was chosen delegate from Weber County to the Constitutional Convention of 1872, being elected by the popular vote February 5th of the last year. He helped to frame the Constitution of the state of Deseret, and the memorial to Congress, being on the committees having having that work in hand. It's a very strange way of wording it. The same year, he represented Weber County in the Democratic Territorial Convention, which was composed of both Mormons and Gentiles and nominated for his wing of the party, Honorable George Buchanan as delegate to Congress, making a pointed speech in the convention. He was a member of and secretary of the People's County Central Committee and a live worker in all political movements. Did they mean lively? Like, it doesn't quite make sense. Making speeches and using his influence in every way for the success of the People's Party. During the same period, he was busily engaged in ecclesiastical affairs under President Franklin D. Richards. In August 1874, he was elected a member of the legislature, representing Weber County in the Territorial Assembly. He took an active part in all general measures, introduced a number of bills, drafted public documents, and rendered other valuable service for which his literary ability and native legal acumen well qualified him. At the same time, he wrote all the editorials and reports of the legislature for the Ogden Junction. In 1875, he found himself so overworked that he resigned the business management of the Junction, but continued as editor, and did all the literary work, local and telegraph included, for both the daily and semi-weekly issues. Yeah, it sounds like he tends to take on too much, yeah? Like that's just a tendency of his. He also continued active in municipal and church affairs. In the fall of 1876, Elder Penrose went to California to represent Thomas and Esther Deuce, not Dunce. Thomas and Esther Deuce, mother and son, in the adjustment of a pecuniary issue. In September of that year, the Deuces had been shot by a Wells Fargo and Company's guard, who dropped his gun, a double-barreled weapon loaded with slugs, the whole contents being fired into them. That's horrible. Gosh. Thomas was literally riddled, and his mother was shot through the windpipe. Gosh. That's horrible. Like, why are they talking about this? Ew. Elder Penrose assisted the doctor to dress the wounds. Both patients recovered. Holy cow. I thought they just died. Wow. The company disclaimed responsibility for the accident, but Elder Penrose met with the managers in San Francisco, prevailed on them, and obtained $5,000 compensation for the Deuces. Good for him. Gosh, that's awful. In June 1877, by request of President Brigham Young, he came to Salt Lake City and became connected with the Deseret News under the general editorial management of George Buchanan. And Brigham Young Jr., the Junction Company, keenly felt his loss and offered to give him the paper entirely. Okay. I think that rings a bell, that he worked on the Deseret News, yeah. On the organization of the Deseret News Company at the first meeting of the Board of Directors held September 3, 1880, Charles W. Penrose was made editor-in-chief of that veteran journal and remained so for years. He became a home missionary of the Salt Lake Stake and traveled and preached in many places. At a special election in 1879, held for the purpose of filling the vacancy caused by the death of Honorable Albert P. Rockwood, member-elect of the legislature for Salt Lake County, Charles W. Penrose was the people's choice for that office, which he filled with credit to himself and to the satisfaction of his constituents. Yeah, I don't know if you recognized Albert P. Rockwood. He was in the presidency of the 70s. He served during the session of 1880 on various important committees, including the Judiciary, and introduced many bills, among them a bill to take away all political disabilities from women. What does that mean? That they are allowed to vote or no? The bill created no end of discussion, comment, and debate, its author making able and pithy speeches in its favor, and finally it passed both houses but was vetoed by the governor. Elder Penrose was re-elected and served in the legislative session of 1882. He was chairman of the Committee on Claims and did a great deal of work on various committees, being particularly useful in drafting public documents and correcting errors in the framing of bills. He was elected to the Constitutional Convention and helped to frame the Constitution of the state of Utah, which was making another effort under a change of name from Deseret for its long-withheld right of admission into the Union. He also assisted to prepare the memorial to Congress. All this time he was performing editorial work for the Deseret News. The death of David O. Calder in the summer of 1884 caused a vacancy in the presidency in the Salt Lake Stake of Zion, which was filled August 2, 1884, Elder Penrose being then appointed at the Quarterly Stake Conference second counselor to President Angus M. Cannon, a position which he still holds, well, in 1901, yeah? Okay, so he was a counselor in the stake presidency when he was called to the Quorum of the 12, is what that means. That's crazy. Can you imagine going from stake president to apostle? Like, that's just such a leap. It's a huge leap. Since that time, his voice has often been heard in the tabernacle and in other congregations of the saints. He is an ever-ready and apparently unfailing fountain of instruction. As one of the presidency of the Salt Lake Stake of Zion, it is also a part of his duty and labors to sit in the High Council in judgment upon all matters before that tribunal. In the fall of 1883, in order to recuperate his energies, which were sorely taxed by overwork, he took a trip in company with Charles R. Savage, Esquire, over the D&R-G Railway to Denver, thence through Colorado, south to New Mexico, Arizona, California, returning to Utah via the Central Pacific route. Why are they so specific about his route? I thought something was going to happen on it, but nothing did. On his return, he resumed his manifold duties. He had previously written a valuable work entitled Mormon Doctrine. In the fall of 1884, he delivered several Sunday evening lectures in the 12th Ward Assembly Hall, answering anti-Mormon objections and charges against the faith and practice of the Latter-day Saints. Chief of those lectures were on blood atonement and the Mountain Meadows Massacre, completely refuting the common stories in relation thereto. Well, good. There's a lot of false reports going around about Mountain Meadows, in my opinion. It was a miscommunication and an accident. It was basically an accident. And I think that seeing it in any other light is not fair to anyone. I've talked about this before. Okay, on another video. So, both lectures were published at the Juvenile Instruction Office. He continued to defend the Mormon cause politically and religiously by press discussions as well as public speeches and private interviews with strangers. These vigorous labors excited the hostility of the anti-Mormon ring, and he was singled out in the crusade under the Edmunds Law as a conspicuous target for their animosity. Well, that means he was a polygamist, yeah? If he wasn't a polygamist, then they wouldn't have cared. In the beginning of January 1885, he was sent on a brief mission to the States, and during his absence, his legal wife and family, down to a boy 8 years old, were compelled to go before the grand jury. They did it in his absence? That's crappy. The wife refused to testify against her husband, but the evidence desired was extorted from the children. 8 years old. That's horrible. While in the States, Elder Penrose was appointed on a mission to England and therewith bade farewell, by letter, to those he held most dear this side of the water, and once more crossed the bosom of the mighty deep. That's crazy. So they were like, hey, we're going to arrest him, and they sent out a warrant, but at that point he was already leaving on a mission, so he just left? That's... You're going to get arrested when you come home. After a rough passage and safe landing at Liverpool, he was appointed by President Daniel H. Wells to preside over the London Conference and assist editorially on the Millennial Star. He revived the work in London, his old field of labor, was gladly hailed by former acquaintances, wrote several articles for London papers, helped to ship emigrants of every company from Liverpool, and attended conferences with President Wells all over England, Scotland, and Wales. He also visited Ireland and preached in the open air in the city of Belfast to 3,000 people. A great uproar ensued, followed by a spirited discussion in the Belfast papers. He visited Dublin and the Isle of Man, and from there went to the Lake District of England. He accompanied President Wells on his continental tour through Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Germany, and Switzerland, preaching in Copenhagen, Christiania, Stockholm, Berlin, and Bern, returning to England by way of Paris. He made a stir in several English towns and brought many persons into the church, besides writing articles for the Star and also for the Deseret News. He returned home from this mission by call from President John Taylor and resumed active work as editor of the Deseret News. He then went to New York and Washington, D.C., and wrote a number of articles for several newspapers defending the church from attacks of enemies. Together with Franklin S. Richards, he visited personally nearly every member of Congress. Wow. And also President Cleveland and Cabinet, explaining the situation in Utah. He also wrote articles for the Deseret News. He spent 2 winters in Washington in this missionary work, wrote articles for the Forum and other magazines on the Mormon question, and interviewed prominent newspapermen. Wow, he had quite an eventful life, yeah? Like, he went lots of places. He went before Congress. Like, he wrote a bajillion articles. Like, this is an impressive amount of work. Having been indicted under the Edmunds Act and been sought for by federal officers in Utah, President Cleveland, at the request of a few influential friends, issued a full amnesty to Elder Penrose just before retiring from the presidency. Wow. Thank you, President Cleveland. Like, that wasn't really expected, I think. Grover Cleveland, huh? Elder Penrose then returned to Salt Lake City and took up his daily labors on the news. He also traveled much in the territory in company with leaders of the church. November 16, 1890. Elder Penrose was called to testify as an expert in Mormon theology before Judge Thomas J. Anderson in the 3rd District Court as to the loyalty of Mormons and their doctrines. An endeavor was made at that time to refuse naturalization to Mormons because they belonged to a treasonable organization. Treasonable, huh? I didn't even know that was a word. After a long examination, Elder Penrose was cross-examined and refused to answer a certain question as to his marital relations, as the subject was not in the examination direct. Okay. No, he doesn't have to answer. Like, it's not relevant, yeah? After a long discussion by lawyers, Judge Anderson decided that he must answer the question, and as he still refused, he was committed to the penitentiary until he would answer, no matter how long his refusal might last. In contempt of court? That's crazy. He was accordingly incarcerated November 20th, 1890, and treated as a criminal for 5 days. When the case before the court was submitted, and as no further testimony could be presented, he was reluctantly released. They said no matter how long it takes, and they only held him for 5 days? Okay. Well, I'm glad they let him go so quick, because that's a stupid reason to be locked up, but, like, jeez, are you serious? When the Deseret News was leased by the Canons October 1st, 1892, Elder Penrose was secured by the Salt Lake Herald on its editorial staff, and made a remarkable and rapid journey down through the settlements to St. George, making several speeches a day and replying through the Herald to political arguments. In 1893, he became editor-in-chief of the Herald and continued in that capacity until the fall of 1895, when he was appointed by the First Presidency to assist in the historian's office. At the General Conference, April 4th, 1896, he was sustained as Assistant Church Historian. In addition to compiling matter for current history, he wrote many articles on Mormonism for Eastern publications and a series of 12 tracts called Rays of Living Light, also Priesthood and Presidency, and articles for the Improvement Era. His reply to Ingersoll in that magazine attracted wide attention. January 1st, 1899, by appointment of President Lorenzo Snow, he resumed his labor as editor-in-chief of the Deseret News, which rapidly sprang into new life and has since increased in circulation and influence until it is now read in every settlement of Utah and surrounding regions. Elder Penrose is still engaged in laboring and writing for the cause to which he has consecrated his time and talents for so many years. He has a firm and thorough belief in the truth and triumph of Mormonism. At the age of 69, he retains apparently all his original activity of mind and physical energies. Time and toil have made but moderate inroads upon this extraordinary vitality. This is all the more remarkable from his not being of a robust constitution, though of healthy physique and strictly temperate habits, and his persistent and almost incessant mental activity. It exemplifies anew the truth of the proverb that it is better to wear out than to rust away. Elder Penrose is of a highly sensitive and sanguine temperament, quick to think, speak, and act. His talents are so versatile, it is almost a question as to wherein kind nature meant him to excel. He is poetical, musical, and has fine spiritual perceptions, and also leans to science and law. His forte is generally thought to be journalism, in which he shines with luster, while as a preacher and polemical writer and debater he has but few equals. His talents and energy fit him eminently for a missionary, in which important calling he meets, invariably with success. His practical experience in various walks of life give him an insight into the thoughts and workings of all classes of society. His advice is sought in difficulty and doubt, and he wins his way easily to the hearts of his fellow men. Charles W. Penrose is a remarkable man. Nature stamped him as such, and his life work, thus far, confirms the truth of her decree. See also Tulige's History of Salt Lake City, Biographical Encyclopedia, page 140. That was long. That was pretty long. It was longer than I would have expected for somebody who was still alive at the time and who hadn't actually reached his peak calling, you know? So clearly there's a lot of holes in this one, because, just by nature. So let's go to the Wikipedia article. I don't think it will be as detailed with the stuff that they did mention already. However, I do think that it's important to go through the whole article because we're missing so many things, yeah? So, let's start at the beginning. Charles William Penrose, February 4th, 1832 to May 16th, 1925, was a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from 1904 to 1911. Penrose was also a member of the First Presidency, serving as a counselor to church presidents Joseph F. Smith and Heber J. Grant from 1911 until his death. See, he was important. Life. Penrose was born in Camberwell, London, England. It is said that he learned to read the Bible by the age of 4. Penrose was introduced to the LDS Church and baptized at the age of 18 on May 14, 1850 in London. He also met and married his wife, Lucetta Stratford, in London. The couple had 15 children. See, they didn't mention that before. Dang it. Mission. After joining the LDS Church, Penrose was called upon a mission, preaching throughout England. It was while on this mission he wrote the hymn, O Ye Mountains High. Interesting, because he hadn't left England at the time. That one's usually considered kind of a Zion hymn. O Ye Mountains High? Think about it. That surprises me. He'd never even been there, is what I'm saying. He'd never been there. He just trusted that it was in the mountains. For the next 7 years, he primarily served as a missionary agricultural areas. Yeah. During this first mission, he wrote, Up, Awake, Ye Defenders of Zion, as a result of the Utah War. Oh, really? I didn't know that was the context there. In 1868, Penrose became the president of the church's London Conference, equivalent to the modern LDS district. He was then made president of the Cheltenham Pastorate, consisting of multiple conferences. He was then placed in charge of the Birmingham Pastorate, presiding over 4 conferences in the West Midlands of England. Penrose wrote a set of mission tracts entitled Rays of Living Light, which were widely used until about the middle of the 20th century. Really? They used those a long time. Utah Territory. In 1861, Penrose emigrated to Utah Territory. After arriving in Utah, he settled in Farmington. The cabin the Penrose family lived at in Farmington is now a museum of the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. Besides working as a farmer and hauling logs, he was also a school teacher. Well, that is really interesting, too. Yeah? Cool. You visit the Museum of the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. That used to be Charles W. Penrose's home. In 1864, Ezra T. Benson convinced Penrose to move to Logan, Utah, where he continued to work as a farmer and school teacher. Penrose was asked to return to England as a missionary in 1865. While on this mission, he published several songs and hymns, including Beautiful Zion for Me, which was written on the occasion of Brigham Young Jr. leaving for Utah. For about the first year of his mission, he preached to coal workers in Lancashire. For the next 2 years, he was in the office of the Millennial Star and was an assistant to the mission president, Franklin D. Richards. Yeah? They did mention all of that, but not in that detail, and not the songs in particular. Farming and retailing. Upon Penrose's return to Utah in 1868, he returned to Logan, where he was involved in farming and retailing. He formed a partnership and then the Logan Cooperative Mercantile Institution, of which he was secretary, treasurer, and bookkeeper, and mentioned that. That failed. Oh, they didn't mention that. And he ended up leaving Logan. While in Logan, Penrose also served as a member of the LDS Stake High Council. Interesting. And then he went into publishing, which was much more successful than his farming endeavors. Publishing. He next settled in Ogden, Utah, on the advice of Franklin D. Richards. Here he became involved in newspaper publishing the Ogden Junction. He was also a prominent public speaker in the community. Penrose also served as a member of the City Council of Ogden. When the Weaver's Stake was organized, Penrose was called as a member of the High Council. In 1877, Penrose became the assistant editor of the LDS Church-owned Deseret News in Salt Lake City, working under George Buchanan. Penrose was known for his writing, including missionary tracts and lyrics of Latter-day Saint hymns, including God of Our Fathers, O Ye Mountains High, and Up, Awake, Ye Defenders of Zion. In 1880, Penrose became the editor-in-chief of Deseret News. Yep. Delegate. In 1872, Penrose was a delegate for Weber County, Utah in the state constitutional convention of that year. While the convention wrote a state constitution, this one was rejected by the U.S. Congress, and Utah did not at that time become a state. That is correct. Penrose served in the Utah Territorial Legislature, first being elected from Ogden in 1874. After moving to Salt Lake City, he was again elected to the state legislature in 1879, elected to fill a vacancy caused by the death of Albert P. Rockwood. In 1880, Penrose introduced a bill in the legislature, largely at the urging of Emmeline B. Wells, that would have allowed women to serve in all public offices in the territory. Really? This bill passed the legislature but was vetoed by the governor of Utah Territory. Penrose served as a member of the Utah State Constitutional Convention of 1882 as well. So, well, that at least explains what that bill he was trying to push through was about, yeah? In 1884, Penrose was called as a counselor to Angus M. Cannon in the presidency of the Salt Lake Stake. Penrose, along with George Reynolds and John R. Winder, edited the 1890 manifesto and prepared it for publication after being given the initial text by Wilford Woodruff. Interesting. I wonder what you would have to edit. That thing is like a paragraph. I don't know. Professor. Here we go. This is new. Penrose was a professor of theology at Brigham Young Academy from 1897 to 1899 and again in 1901 to 1902. Penrose was made a member of the LDS Council of 50 in 1882. An arrest warrant was issued for him on polygamy charges in December 1884. In January 1885, he traveled to Washington, D.C., where he met with Grover Cleveland, among others. Some of these meetings were done jointly with Brigham Young, Jr. Penrose then served a mission in England for about 6 months. He presided over the London Conference and also worked closely with the mission president Daniel H. Wells. Penrose preached in all the lands of the United Kingdom as well as in Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, and Denmark while on this mission. In late 1889, Penrose was pardoned by Cleveland for polygamy and shortly after went to prison for contempt of court for refusing to testify against other polygamists. Oh, really? That's not what they said in the article. They said that it was because he refused to comment about his own personal marital status. Interesting. No, he was definitely a polygamist then. Salt Lake. In 1892, Penrose left the Deseret News and joined the staff of the Salt Lake Herald. Huh. I thought he stayed at the Deseret News for longer than that, yeah? He also became an assistant historian of the LDS Church. That same year, he was delegate to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. In 1894, Penrose was one of the initial directors of the Genealogical Society of Utah. He became vice president of the society in 1909 and president in 1921, serving in that position until his death. In 1898, Penrose returned to the Deseret News as editor. So he bounced around a little bit with the newspapers, yeah? Apostle. Penrose was called to the quorum of the 12 apostles and ordained an apostle on July 7, 1904. He was called to fill a vacancy in the quorum caused by the death of Abraham O. Woodruff. From 1906 to 1910, Penrose served as president of the LDS Church's European Mission. On December 7, 1911, Penrose became second counselor to Joseph F. Smith in the church's first presidency. He replaced John Henry Smith, who died. James E. Talmage filled the vacancy in the Quorum of the 12 caused by Penrose's being called to the first presidency. After Joseph F. Smith's death in 1918, Penrose was retained as second counselor by new church president Heber J. Grant. On March 10, 1921, Penrose became first counselor in the first presidency, following the death of Anton H. Lund, who had died 8 days earlier. Yeah. Family. Penrose first married during his first mission to Lucetta Stratford in 1855. They had originally requested permission to marry in 1854, but it was not granted at that time by mission leaders. Why were the mission leaders involved? I'm so confused. LDS missionaries marrying was allowed in the 19th century, and in the cases of single missionaries about to leave the mission for a long trek to Utah, at times even encouraged. Okay, it's because he was still a missionary. That's why he asked for permission. I get it. Charles and Lucetta had 15 children, although only 7 survived infancy. In 1863, Penrose married Louise Elizabeth Lusty. They eventually had 11 children, 8 of whom lived to adulthood. Penrose was married to Romania B. Pratt Penrose in 1886. So, interesting. After he was acquitted, well, I mean pardoned, I would say pardoned, of polygamy, then he married again after that. That's really crazy. Romania B. Pratt, that rings a bell. I want to say that she was involved in the Young Women's Organization, like something like that. Not sure. I want to say that she was involved in something. Oh, she was a medical doctor. Okay, Dr. Esther Romania Bunnell Pratt Penrose. Okay, well that's kind of cool. You know, I feel like he would have valued education. So, yeah, that's interesting. But it looks like she didn't have any children. So I wonder if that wasn't so much a physical relationship, yeah? Or maybe he was just done having kids. Who knows? All right, death. Penrose served in the first presidency until his death in Salt Lake City from chronic prostatitis. So he had a prostate problem? In the Improvement era, on the occasion of his death, George H. Brimhall published a poem praising Penrose for his works of hymns. He was buried at Salt Lake City Cemetery. All right, his hymns. Some of Penrose's poems were put to music and became LDS church hymns. Penrose's Up, Awake, Ye Defenders of Zion, originally a militant hymn, contained references to trials of Latter-day Saints in the central United States, and the threatening United States government, ironically set to the melody for Columbia, Gem of the Ocean, became an anthem for Latter-day Saints during the difficulties preceding and during the Utah War of 1857-58. Some of Penrose's lyrics appear in LDS Church's 1985 hymnal. That's current. I guess it's being replaced at the moment, but it's not been replaced yet, so the current one. Including, God of our fathers, we come unto thee, O ye mountains high, school thy feelings, Up, awake, ye defenders of Zion, with modified lyrics. Okay. Wow. Well, that was really interesting. Like, I learned tons about this dude. I hope you did too. Like, that's really interesting. What I find most interesting is probably the part where he had a warrant out for his arrest as a polygamist. And instead of returning home, he went on a mission. When he came back, he hung out in Washington, D.C. for a while, where they wouldn't necessarily recognize him as being the person who needed to be arrested. And during that time, he met the president, and then we got a presidential pardon. But then was put into contempt of court for refusing to testify. Oh, gosh. It's interesting. I found that was really interesting. Like, and I do admire that was only for 5 days. Like, that was positive because it ended up resolving so quickly. If it had gone on and dragged on for ages and ages, then that would have been a lot to deal with. But yeah, I found that really interesting, and I hope you did too. And if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.